All right, so good evening, everyone. Hope you are doing well this evening. Decided to do a little bit of Father's Day trivia there since we have Father's Day coming up in a couple of weeks. So do a Father's Day trivia this week, Father's Day trivia next week. Just a quick housekeeping. I'll try to do this again at the end for people who tune in late. There will be a live stream next week. But it's not really a live stream. It's going to be a pre-recorded Bible class. So don't try to send me a message. I won't be here, but I will be recording it earlier and going ahead and putting it out there so you can watch. And so it will still will stay on topic. It'll be 2 Timothy chapter 4, starting with verse 9 next week. But don't try to text me a question because I won't be here to answer it. You'll have to let me know the question later, and I'll try to get that done at another time. But anyway, thanks for joining in tonight if you're out there listening. And we are going to be in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 1 through 8. So grab a Bible, and we'll jump into the text in just a minute and kind of talk through that and look through some of those things. I just noticed some of my notes that I prepared didn't really show up on my stuff the way they're supposed to. So this might be a little different. And if you've got a question, you can put it in the Facebook chat or YouTube, or it's better if you just text it to me. But hey, let's just jump into the text, have some fun, look at what Paul has to say to Timothy, and we'll just jump in from there, I guess. I had something else I was going to tell you, but I can't remember what it was, so it'll come to me later, and we will have a conversation about that. So let me get my Bible program up here. We are in 2 Timothy chapter 4. I don't know if you can read that on the screen. Somebody tell me sometime whether you can read that text on the screen or not if it's too small. I'm looking at a really small screen that I use just to see what's going out on the live feed, so I can't really tell how large that text is or how large it would be on your screen. I could always make that bigger if we need to at some point. But just shoot me a text, let me know. I probably can't see the Facebook questions or the Facebook comments until we get to the end. I'll try to look at them a couple of times during the live stream. I'm really going to try to figure out a way that I can start getting some guests on here and have some guests either sitting here with me or just calling in as we talk and go through the text. I've asked a couple of people to come in. Nobody seems real anxious to jump on a live stream, but we'll get that done one of these days. I'd like to do that. So 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1. I'm reading from the New International Version. You know that if you listen to me very much, that's typically the English translation that I use. Just simply, it's the NIV 1984. And again, it's just simply because that's the one that I grew up with. That's the one that I was reading when I was in my teenage years. And I've just, if I grab an English translation, that's probably what it is. I just stick with it. I don't think you can actually get that anymore. So unless you have an electronic copy or some printed copy sitting around like I do, you probably can't even get it. But 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1, in the presence of God and of Christ Jesus, who will judge the living and the dead, and in view of his appearing and his kingdom, I give you this charge. I just got somebody just said I can, by the way, and I'm assuming that's I can read the text on the screen. So, when you look at this verse, and this is a really good, it's a really good translation. This is not critical of the translation in any way, so please understand that. Sometimes in Greek, when you're reading the Greek language, sometimes word order makes a difference. And the thing about this text, this verse, is the first word that Paul wrote here was, I give you this charge. So in this translation of the English, it's at the kind of the end of the sentence. In the original, it would have been at the beginning of the sentence, and it's important because at the beginning of the sentence, it's there for emphasis. He wants him to understand this is not like a little ordinary type introduction. It's not like Paul is just kind of easing into this conversation. He doesn't have to build rapport with Timothy. I mean, they've been sharing the gospel together for quite a while. But this is it's more like courtroom language. it's like a summons. It's like, it's not like advice. It's a dying apostle, or apostle who knows he's probably soon going to be dying, handing down this final commission, with this full weight of eternal consequence. So it's like he's speaking like someone, which is why we call it the last words, right? He knows his time is short, and the next words that Timothy hears, this letter that he's writing to Timothy, needs to shape the rest of his life. So this is kind of a judicial type tone. It doesn't mean I encourage you or I suggest that maybe you do this. It's Paul maybe actually saying, I testify before the court of heaven. It's almost the kind of language where where Paul is swearing Timothy in. It's not like Timothy's a volunteer. It's like he's swearing him in, like we would swear in a witness under oath. It's that kind of courtroom language. It's the kind of language that kind of binds your conscience. It's the language you would use if the stakes are life and death. So it's a command, but it's not just a command. It's this sacred obligation. So I was trying to think of different ways you could say this, and I didn't really write any of them down, so this is a little bit off the top of my head. But it's like a general giving orders to a trusted soldier, or maybe a coach giving a play to a trusted quarterback. You got to carry them to the end. So. And he does that in the presence of God and of Jesus Christ. So it's not like a private moment. It's, in the Old Testament where everything, if you had something that was testified in a court of law, it had to be by at least two witnesses. This is the kind of scene where Paul is putting Timothy under a charge, and the two witnesses that he is calling in is the presence of God and of Jesus Christ. So before the Father, everything is laid bare before him. Jesus, the risen Lord, seated in glory. So it's spoken with a divine commission, with two witnesses who are testifying to it. And the two witnesses aren't just two ordinary witnesses. They're just not two people who wandered off the street. It's in the presence of God and of Jesus Christ. And then he gets more into something I guess I'd probably call it motivation for what is going to follow, because this Jesus who will judge the living and the dead. And that's why this commission is so important that Paul is giving to Timothy, and that's why it's so important for Timothy to fulfill the commission. The one that's going to decide is the one who judges the living and the dead. It's not, it's not like Timothy is supposed to do this for applause or for what somebody else might say about it, or how somebody else might feel about it, or, some pat on the back from a trusted friend. You answer to the judge, and it's not like that's just a future concept either. It's real. He's personal. He's appointed. He will hold every soul who has ever lived accountable. So, if you're silent when you need to declare truth, that's what Jesus calls in a judgment. If you're too judgmental when you need to be quiet, that's what Jesus is calling into judgment. So it's not, he's not a bystander. He's the righteous judge, and he's calling us to stand before him. And it's going to be, if you read this, in view of his appearing in his kingdom. So I charge you by God and Jesus Christ. He's going to judge the living and the dead. And it's in view of his appearing, which, you might look at that and think, well, is it past appearing or future appearing? Yes, I think. I don't think we have to choose between the two, really. You have his appearing in that he came in the flesh, and he modeled and he he gave himself on the cross, and he modeled for us how we're to serve God. So you have that appearing. You also have Paul looking forward to another appearing, the second appearing. You have a kingdom where his kingdom is already there in one sense, but in another sense, there's still part of the kingdom to come. It's already and not yet. And when Paul gives this charge to Timothy, he's pulling all of that together, and he's really giving Timothy this motivation for the command. This is why you are doing it. You're serving a king, but it's not Caesar. It's not an earthly kingdom. You're serving the eternal King who will judge the living and the dead, who has appeared, and he is going to appear again. So there's a lot of gravity in that. I mean, there's a lot of things happening, and what Paul is trying, I think, to get Timothy to do is to understand that what's happening here, it has eternal consequence. So he's supposed to be, when he's appealing to God and Jesus Christ and the judging, the living and the dead, and in view of his appearing, in view of his kingdom, he's trying to get Timothy to look outside himself and look at something much bigger and much greater. I know you probably don't want to see those things popping around on my screen there when I do this, but there is this book that I read. It's been years and years ago. It was called The Christian Mind by Harry Blamires. And if you've heard me preach very much, you've heard me mention this book. I think it was written in 1963. It'll probably tell us here somewhere. I'm sure there's probably skipped by it, but there's a statement that he makes in this book, and I remember reading it, and I just remember the impression that it made on me, and I just wanted to share it with you. And he's talking about having this Christian mind, and he makes this really bold statement at the very start of the book, and he says, there's no longer a Christian mind. That's a pretty bold statement. But when you get like a couple of pages in and he tells you why he wrote that, it really resonates, or at least it resonates with me. He says, there's kind of a Christian practice, and he goes through what a Christian does. He accepts religion, he does prayer, he does meditation, he strives to cultivate a life that is centered on following Christ. And I'm going to start reading right here. I don't know if you can see if I highlight this or not. I just wanted to read this one passage. But he rejects the religious view of life, the view which sets all earthly issues within the context of the eternal, the view which relates all human problems, social, political, and cultural, to the doctrinal foundations of the Christian faith, the view which sees all things here below in terms of God's supremacy and earth's transitoriness in terms of heaven and hell. And that is really a really great, I think that's a really great piece of writing, because the challenge in that is that we understand life not just within the context of what happens here, but when we judge things in life, because we are followers of Jesus, we judge things in terms of heaven and hell. We judge things in terms of eternal and temporary, and we judge all things by God and Jesus Christ. So that we just have a totally different worldview. And in these first verses, I really think that is what Paul is calling Timothy to do. I mean, it's like in a court of law, Timothy, I am calling you, I'm swearing you in the presence of God and Jesus, who are going to judge all things and have appeared in the kingdom. I need you to do this. And if you put it in the context of what we've looked at in the last couple of weeks, he talked about the false teachers in the first part of chapter 3, and we talked about that. Then he compares himself, kind of a contrast between his behavior and the behavior of the false teachers, which we looked at last week. And now what he is telling Timothy is, look, I need, based on my example, based on the gift that you have through the Spirit, this is what I need you to do. So here's the command. The first is preach the word. And that's we got a semicolon there. Uh, and maybe it shouldn't be that abrupt. Maybe we shouldn't see like preach the word just as one thing sitting out there by itself. But it's preach the word, and he says, be prepared in season and out of season. There's a couple of things about that verse I just wanted to kind of go over. One is there's a word in there that means preach the word, be prepared, but it's not just that you're prepared. It's not. It's that word also carries the idea of persistent. Be persistent in it. Be consistent in it. Don't stop doing it. I mean, always be persistent in preaching the word. I mean, just don't do it occasionally. Be persistent. Be prepared. And we lean more toward the be prepared part of that, which is good, but it also has that idea of persistency and consistency. And you do it in season and out of season. You might read that and you might think, well, what in the world is in season and out of season? Like in the summer, but not in the winter, or in the spring, but not in the fall. Because what is in season for the word and what is out of season for the word? And it's a really good translation, but it's kind of the opportune time and the time that there's no opportunity. Like he's contrasting these two things, and there's no this and that. There's no connective word in there. It's like when there's opportunity and when opportunity doesn't exist. You still preach the word. You still do the same thing. That idea of opportunity is used a couple of other times in the text. When Judas is going to betray Jesus, and he says, so he watched for an opportunity to hand him over. The word's used there. It's used when there was an opportunity when Herod gave a banquet on his birthday. But it's when people are receptive, you preach. When they're not receptive, you preach. And I was thinking about Paul and just his background as he did that. There were times that Paul preached and everybody's receptive. Everybody's listening, everybody's responding, people are paying attention. There are other times when he's in, sometimes in prison or persecution, or the Jews are revolting against him, where it doesn't look like an opportune time. But our responsibility is, and Timothy's responsibility is, to preach the gospel, whether, I wrote it this way, whether it's a good time or even a not time. Whenever the time is, you continue to preach the word. And this is what you do when you preach it. This is in the text. You convict, you rebuke, and you admonish. And just for a couple of minutes, we'll talk about that. Those are, I guess it's fair to say they're three pretty sacred tools. I was trying to think of different ways we might define those. Maybe convict, the idea of you expose what's hidden. You make the truth unavoidable. If there's some behavior that's trying to hide in a dim place, maybe it's not really attack on a person. It's a confrontation with whatever they've embraced in life. It's kind of a spirit-led clarity. It's the ability to reveal what's wrong, but do it in a way that you don't crush somebody's soul. Now, I think when I think about those examples, I think about Nathan when he went to David, and David had committed the sin with Bathsheba, and so Nathan goes, and he tells the parable about the man who had the lamb, and there was a rich man, and he had all kind of lambs, but for this one man, this poor man, that lamb was like a child, and the rich man had guests coming, so instead of taking one of his lambs, he went and got the one lamb from the poor man and used it for the feast. And it infuriated David. He was angry, and then Nathan just looked at him and said, "You are the man." And so that's what the Spirit does. The Spirit comes to convict us, and part of our responsibility, and sometimes it's not easy. In fact, I would say most times it's pretty hard, but part of our responsibility is to convict. And these are all pretty negative words. The last one, admonish, can have a positive tone, but I don't think it does the way these words are used. So you convict. You rebuke. I mean, you draw a line, right? I think of a scene in, I think it was the Alamo. I don't remember who the actors were in the old Alamo movie with John Wayne, but he drew the line, and if you want to leave, you can cross the line, and but if you want to stay, they had a similar scene in the movie Pearl Harbor. That's you draw a line and say, look, what's on the other side of this line just can't continue. It's when we confront sin directly, and we don't do it like in frustration, or we don't do it with a superior mindset. We do it with just clarity, with righteous sorrow, and even watching ourselves so that we won't be tempted in the way that Paul said that. It's, that rebuke is maybe a way to say it is kind of a holy no. It's just a line that we draw across the floor of compromise and just say, we can't have that type of behavior. Paul's rebuke of Peter when they were in Antioch, that's the kind of rebuke that we're talking about. It's not about authority. It's not about volume. It's just when we need to speak on the behalf of God, which is very, very difficult, but it names something that's happening that needs to change. And then you got this last word, which is admonish. The word can also mean to encourage, right? So it's kind of a dual meaning, but it's when it's not. I don't know. Sometimes when I hear the word admonish, I think of the word to scold, but it's not to scold. It's to admonish in a positive way. This kind of sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? But it's to do it in a positive way, saying you can rise. There's time. You can repent. You can come back to God. It's encouraging, but it's doing it in a way that you're admonishing someone to step away from behavior. And you look at that, and especially in the text, and you say, well, why is Paul using these negative words? Why is he using like the words of correct and rebuke and admonish? I mean, why isn't he using more positive words? Well, the reason that he's doing that is actually in the text. And you're supposed to do that with, before we jump too far there, you're supposed to do that with, the NIV there says, great patience and careful instruction. The great patience is the word endurance, and it's where you hold your ground. It's where obedience is going to cost you something, but even though it's going to cost you something, you remain obedient. It's Jesus in the garden. It's to persevere. It's not the absence of hardship. It's the refusal to give up when there is hardship. Paul doesn't tell Timothy, hey, don't worry about it. Hardship's not ever going to come. He doesn't tell Timothy to escape hardship or even how to escape hardship. He tells him how to endure hardship. And that's not cruelty. It's the calling that we have in Christ. We just can't have that calling without sometimes having conflict or suffering. So endurance, you do this, Timothy, with endurance. So when your faith gets tested, when you are in a situation where people are telling you to quit, you keep on. It's not about performance or convenience. It's about endurance. So you become seasoned and weathered and wise and ready, and you run that race with endurance. So first you do it with that kind of patience, that kind of endurance. And then the word for careful instruction is actually a word that really means like doctrine. And I want to say something. I hope you take this in the right way. Doctrine gets decried in our day. Doctrine gets misused like it's dry or sterile, or it's something that people do because they're not really serving with the heart. Doctrine is not like that at all. Doctrine is very fundamental and essential to Christian belief. And we sometimes use it in a way that we'll say that, in fact, there's a difference between doctrine and life, or people in our day, they just don't want to hear doctrine. But doctrine is a statement of divine fact. And it's a foundation of religious life. So we shouldn't use the word doctrine like it's a bad word. Doctrine is a good word. Sound doctrine shapes the truth that keeps the soul from collapsing. So it's not dry. It's not a classroom word, right? Doctrine is a spiritual framework where we see God rightly. We see him as he is, and we try to live wisely because we see who God is. It goes back to that first verse that we're looking at. And he says, look, the time's going to come, and the reason he uses these negative words, he said the time is going to come when people aren't going to put up with sound doctrine. I mean, they're not going to listen to truth. They are going to do something or find some message that suits their desires, and they will go out and they will find teachers and put teachers around them who just tell them what they want to hear. You know, Paul describes, and I really think it's really funny. He says, they say what their itching ears want to hear. I don't know if you ever had an ear that's like really itches, but you can't hardly help but scratch it. But you got this thing going on. So it's this craving. And it's why Paul uses the words that he does, the correct, rebuke, and admonish words, okay? Because he's addressing a situation where we're craving comfort, but what we need is confrontation. We need someone to tell us the truth, and what we want is somebody to tell us what we want to hear. And it sounds better because it doesn't sound like we're rejecting the truth. We just want it the way that we want it. We just want it to say what we want it to say. But that idea of itching ears, that really kind of it reveals the condition of the heart. They're not going to put up with sound doctrine. They're not going to stand under the truth. They're going to find these teachers who tell them what they want to hear. It's like when you preach a sermon sometimes, and you get ready to leave, and somebody walks up to you and says, man, that was a really great sermon. I really enjoyed that. And you're thinking, well, if you really enjoyed it, did I do what I was supposed to do? Right? I mean, there are times that it shouldn't just be like it's good to hear. It should convict us of something. It should challenge us to do something. So it's not like they're rejecting the truth, but they're doing it in a way that it just kind of looks like they miss it. They're not like kicking it out. They're just replacing it with something that sounds better. That just something that they like better. And I'll just be honest. I mean, there's a real challenge to do that. I mean, there's a real temptation there where, if we can take something that God said and we can water it down just a little bit, or do something so it's really just not so abrasive, we'll try to do that because it just doesn't hurt as bad. It's I don't know if you ever tried to sand something, and you use sandpaper for a while, and sometimes after you've used sandpaper for a while, you got to get another piece of sandpaper because that one wears down, it just not doing its job. And sometimes we just, that abrasiveness, sometimes we just tend to let that work out so that it doesn't challenge us hardly as much. I remember a story Tom Holland told. It wasn't really a story. I guess it was a parable back when I was at Lipscomb. And he said, the conscience is, there was an Indian tale, and I don't know if this is true or not, right? I'm just telling you what he said in class. There was this tale about an Indian, and he was trying to describe the conscience. And he said, it's the thing that's inside you, and it's got really sharp edges. And so when you do something wrong, the sharp edges, it twists, and the sharp edges cut you, and it hurts. But if you do something wrong long enough, then the sharp edges will get ground down, and now they're rounded edges instead of sharp edges, and it doesn't hurt you anymore. Well, that's what itching ears is about. It's like we're going to dull the message down so it doesn't hurt. And so then the problem with that is with the list itching ears, and then if like Timothy is the messenger and he's trying to appease the itching ears, then the listener becomes, he becomes, I guess, is it wrong to say the Lord of the pulpit? I don't know. You're not judging sermons now by scripture. You're judging them by taste. And so we start asking questions, not like, is it true, but did I enjoy it? And I'm not saying you shouldn't enjoy a sermon. I think you should enjoy a sermon, right? I don't want to preach sermons that people don't enjoy, but they're replacing this spirit-born hunger with just a desire to hear what they want to hear, and they replace it with a myth, and it's not just kind of a literary term. It's they have cultural or religious roots. It's not that word's not inherently negative, by the way. It could mean a fable or a legend or a teaching narrative. It could be some kind of speculative story, but especially in 1 Timothy and in 2 Timothy, when he is talking about Ephesus, he talks about these myths a lot. And for us, the thing that we need to know is they're like a counterfeit. They're like a counterfeit theology. It's something that tries to give you spiritual life, but it does it apart from the truth of God, or it does it by adding things to the truth of God. It mimics a form of faith, but it lacks the real power of faith. Truth, maybe you can think of it this way: truth comes from above, from God. Myth rises up from below, and it's from human minds. We try to soothe and explain and inspire. But if you try to do that without submission to God and submission to God's word and submission to God's truth, then it becomes distorted. And Paul says that's what's going to happen. They're going to become distorted like that. And so, we even live in a world that's got, we have all kind of myths, don't we? The myth of self-truth, you can have, maybe in some ways that the church can have progress without having holiness, or, try not to call out too many things, but in our world, sometimes there's this myth of cheap grace and what that means, or religious busyness. As long as you're busy, you're serving God. If you just stay active, then God's pleased with that. Well, you can stay active and you can do a lot of things, but still not have the relationship with God that you're supposed to have. So he's saying to Timothy, look, I'm charging you in a court of law with God and Jesus listening in, that I need you to go out and you're going to combat this, and you're going to be the voice of God in a world that really doesn't want to hear the voice of God. And you talk about a challenge for the church. That is a challenge for the church. And it's still the same challenge. We are to be the voice of God in a world that doesn't want to hear the voice of God. We're not our own voice. We don't come up with things ourselves. We don't create things. We are God's voice in a world that doesn't want to listen to the voice of God. So he says, look, what I need you to do is I need you to do that, but you need to understand you've got to finish the race. And Paul uses himself as an example here. He says, look, I'm being poured out like a drink offering. And the thing about a drink offering is when you pour out a drink offering, you pour all of it out, right? You don't pour part of it out. You pour all of it out. And that's why Paul uses this terminology. My entire life is being poured out to God. I'm being poured out like a drink offering. And, I hope when I come to the end of my days on this earth, whenever that is, and I hope that whenever you come to the end of your days on this earth, whenever that is, like Paul, is we can say, hey, we're a drink offering. We're pouring out the whole thing. It's Leviticus. It's Leviticus language, right? It's not for nourish. It's done as worship. And Paul is saying, look, Timothy, I've poured out my life, and I'm going to need you to pour out your life. Just like Timothy would write to us and say, I need you to pour out your life, because Paul knows here the time of my departure is near. He knows. He doesn't know, I don't think, the exact date. I don't think he knows exactly how it's going to happen. I think he understands from the situation that he is in that his life is very quickly drawing to an end. He says, when he writes something like the time has come for my departure, he knows that his days on the earth in the flesh is numbered. Not his days, but his days on earth in the flesh is numbered. So he says, I fought the good, and we use this verse a lot, right? I fought the good fight, I finished the race, and I've kept the faith. I was thinking about that, and I don't know if I can show you. I'm gonna try to show you something. Maybe if I can do this. Uh, this is actually, and I think it's just a great illustration for this, and hopefully you'll like this. This is a there's no sound with this, by the way, because if I try to do sound, YouTube would mute it because of media rights and all that kind of stuff. But this is a game with Oregon and Utah, and so they throw this long pass. Utah does. The guy grabs the ball, and the guy's head's going to get in the way right here at the end, right? So it looks like he runs into the end zone and gets a touchdown. Except he does. I mean, everybody's screaming and yelling and, excited. We got a touchdown. We got a touchdown. But something very interesting happens. Oregon picks the ball up and runs it back the other way. Runs it all the way down the field. So they get all the way down the field, and it's like, okay, well, they got a touchdown. And the commentators are like, what in the world is happening here? But look, before he gets to the finish line, he drops the ball. And here's another view of it. He gets close, and then he drops the ball before he gets across the finish line. And I think that is such a cool illustration to what Paul is talking about here. Make sure you finish the race. Don't drop the football right before you cross the goal line. Finish the race and do the thing that you need to do. Because he says, look, I'm already being poured out like a drink offering. And just listen to the words. The time has come for my departure. That's when he says, I fought the good fight. I finished the race. I've kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, remember at the very beginning up here, will judge the living and the dead. Paul says the righteous judge will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. So he's saying to Timothy, look, in the presence of God and of Jesus Christ, who's going to judge the living and the dead, there's something that you need to do. You need to fulfill your mission that God has given you. And when it comes to the end, and it will, there will come a time, and there was in Timothy's life. I don't know when it was. It's not recorded in Scripture, but there came a time that Timothy, I don't know if he was a martyr, if he laid down his life for Christ, or if he died by old age. I don't know what happened. But there was a time where he finished the race, and the time had come for his departure. But when the time comes for our departure, if we've served God, there's in store for us something else, the crown of righteousness. And so here, Paul has written this letter to Timothy, and we've been through a lot of things in the letter. But here toward the end of the letter, we're at the very end, he says, listen, I'm just encouraging you to finish the race. I'm encouraging you to do the thing that you know that you need to do. I'm encouraging you, we might say in our world, to use the gift that God has given you. Make sure that whatever you do, you serve God with everything that you have. Finish the race and be the type of person that God needs you to be in a world. And while you remember that they're going to have itching ears, you're spreading the message of God to a world that doesn't want to hear the message of God. So don't be surprised when they don't listen, or don't be surprised when they oppose you. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that. Next week we will be last word, 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 9 through 18. Remember, that will be pre-recorded. You can tune in at 7 and it'll play. After that, and it may be the next day before I get it posted up to the websites. But after that, we can post it up to the websites, or you can go on YouTube or Facebook and watch it after it broadcasts later, if you want to go to one of those two places. If you want to join Sunday morning, have Bible class Sunday morning talking about David. And then Sermon Sunday morning is prayer between the fire and the whisper. And I'll be honest with you, I'm still kind of working on this. This is one of those sermons that's just kind of bouncing around inside my head. I'm not, I think it's going to be an okay sermon, right? But it's just, if it were a soup, it's like it's got to cook for a while to simmer to get some flavor in it, but I think it'll be fine. It's just really kind of a sermon that was about prayer and understanding the holiness of God, but also the relationship that we have with God and trying to balance those two out. But anyway, hope you can join us for that Sunday morning. We'll be doing class at 9 o'clock, and then we'll be live streaming worship at 10. Hope you've enjoyed the class tonight. Let me look really quickly, see if there's any questions. I forget, I'll be honest with you, I forget to go back and look for questions after I look at this. Brought to my mind the song, A Charge to Keep I Have. Yeah, it's a good song. That's a really cool song that you probably don't want me to sing it, but I could. I know all of the words. Y'all have a great evening, and I will... hopefully, if you can't be with us in person on Sunday, you can jump on the live stream. So have a good evening.